This feels weird because my friend Jeff is here. And he's sitting here typing up something next to me. And so I'm like, I gotta talk loud, so I'm just gonna jump into it. This video requires that, nope, not what I want to say. Okay. This video requires that you viewed the video on test preparation, which includes an in-depth look at the theory of learning and how memory works. In this video, we will address good note-taking strategies that will help you decide what works best for you when taking notes. Essentially, when we take notes, we are outsourcing that information. We are taking our memory and putting it on paper. Let's talk a little bit about how note-taking assists in the learning process. Note-taking requires our short-term memory. Remember, that's the working memory. While taking notes, you are utilizing your working memory to get information down on paper. I just moved further away from Jeff because his clicking was really loud, so hopefully it sounds better. You do this through comprehension, analyzing, synthesizing, etc., and production, writing down the notes. Effective note-taking finds a balance between the production of notes and the comprehension of those notes. You can spend all your mental effort transcribing a lecture, in which case you are solely focused on production. Well, what do I mean by production? Production is the creation of an end product. With note-taking, if you were to truly transcribe a lecture, it would require you to use all your working memory to focus on what is being said. There would be little to no room for analysis. Now, the positive of this style of note-taking is that you have full notes that you could use to study later. However, if you put all of your effort into production, you will not learn during the actual lecture time. Another option is that you can entirely focus on comprehension. You would accomplish this by not taking notes, in which case you would not have the added benefit of being able to review information at a later time. It seems necessary then to attempt to strike a balance between production of notes and comprehension of material. So why should you take notes? First, it has been demonstrated that learning occurs not only when reviewing the notes, but also when actually creating and taking the notes. In order to take effective notes, the note taker must listen to the instructor, actually understand what is being said, and identify the most important points that need to be written down. All this is done while choosing how to actually physically organize the notes. And don't forget that the note taker is also under a severe time constraint, as the lecturer will not likely wait for them to keep up. Note taking isn't an easy process and requires effort. One study by Pialat in 2005 showed note taking could be as cognitively demanding as chess is to an expert chess player. That is part of why note taking has the potential to be so effective for learning. Good note taking is an active process. You can't just passively receive information. You must categorize, analyze, and synthesize information. Plus, you have that information handy for a later time. So what's the best way to take notes? Well, there isn't a best way. Sure, there are bad ways like transcription, although this potentially can be beneficial for those who have difficulty with working memory. But what really matters is that you find something that works for you. Notes can also be utilized in the workplace. One study conducted in 2002 showed that by creating notes from a job application, employers increased their fact recall when conducting an interview. Now what? Find your note-taking strategy. In order to do this, let's talk about note-taking categories. Note-taking can be broadly categorized into two types, linear and nonlinear. Linear follows traditional forms of text such as outlines. Nonlinear is usually more graphical in nature. It allows organization in a systematically yet unconventional way. Of course, the system you create will probably have elements of both linear and nonlinear in it. Now that we know the types, let's address actual strategies. Handwritten versus keyboard. Which is better? Basically, do what works for you. The verdict is still out there as to which is better. The keyboard obviously reduces cognitive resources devoted to the production of notes. However, some studies show that with effective handwritten notes, the level of cognitive resource devoted to note-taking ultimately isn't that bad. There's a few risks involved with the keyboard as well. First, because of the ease of typing, it may be tempting to go on to autopilot and just write what the teacher is saying, thereby circumventing the crucial comprehension component. Also, a laptop makes distraction via the internet a much greater risk. Furthermore, keyboards are much more difficult to do a non-linear note-taking system on. So if you prefer non-linear, a laptop is not going to be as effective for you. Transcription. Why should you do it? Generally, this is a no-no, mostly because it is so taxing and requires review of the notes to be effective. If you just transcribe the lecture and never go back to review, you will basically miss everything. Are you really going to go back and review your transcription of 5 different 50-minute lectures? I think that's unlikely. With the transcription, you have richer detail to go back and review. However, you will gain very little comprehension during the lecture. Let me tell you a story. A group of scientists wanted to explore the differences in effectiveness of various note-taking strategies. In their first experiment, students were given the choice to either transcribe a lecture or take organized notes on the lecture. They also took notes either by hand or by computer. The results? Those transcribing using the computer method showed the best recall on tests immediately following. These were the students who were trying to write down everything that was said. Not an easy task, and actually it is something that is not recommended. The second experiment showed that taking organized notes was best for delayed tests. In this case, it was 24 hours after the initial lecture. Great, that means we're back on track with most note-taking advice. However, it is experiment number 3 that is of the most interest. When given the opportunity to study the notes, the transcribers actually had better recall on the delayed tests than those in any of the note-taking categories. This study happened shortly after the lecture was given. Why is this important? Well, this is important if you struggle with working memory, the part of memory used to keep notes while listening to the lecture. If you feel like you may be struggling with taking notes, you may simply have a slower working memory. This experiment seems to indicate that if you simply transcribe the lecture to the best of your ability on a computer, then study those notes briefly after the lecture, you could potentially level the playing field, or potentially do even better than someone taking regular notes. Reviewing notes. This is probably the most important step when note-taking. Generally in college, I wouldn't even touch my notes until 2 to 3 days before the next test. But this really loses much of the benefits of taking notes. The literature is pretty ubiquitous on this point, and from what I read, it's important to review often, but maybe even more importantly to review early. This completely lines up with what we've been talking about in regards to working memory. In order to strengthen the neural pathways, you have to re-engage those pathways within 60 to 90 minutes of the initial learning. So when I say early, I mean like right after class. Next tip. It is best to make your own notes and review them if you want to have long-term learning. An implication of this is that it is tempting to simply use handouts, but it may be better for you in the long run to make your own notes. Another great tip. According to a paper from 2013, the largest factor associated with optimal review is for the learner to transform their notes in some interactive way, rather than simply reading or copying their notes. Again, this seems to fit perfectly into what we've learned regarding self-testing. The interactive review can be done by writing a summary paragraph of your notes, creating note cards, making a graph, or even taking Cornell notes. There's a lot of possibilities. Note-taking really is key if you want to be able to learn long-term. Effective note-taking isn't just about schoolwork. It applies to many areas of our life. Specifically, the place you'll need good notes is in the workplace. When you have 10 meetings a day, you are going to need to be able to pick out and write down the most important information. As you get older and you add more responsibility to your life, you've got to be ready to take on the added challenges. And the bottom line is you can't remember everything. There's just too much. So knowing how to categorize important information is critical if you don't want to go nuts and that you actually want to accomplish your goals. When you're balancing work, spouse, children, church, exercise, free time, you could easily get overwhelmed. Now is the time to put into place practices that will help you succeed in future years. Because trust me from experience, when you have those responsibilities, it's going to be a challenge to figure these things out while you're in the midst of the craziness of life. Thanks for listening. Until next time.